We're providing investors with a diverse exposure to the psychedelics industry. The psychedelics space, according to some estimates, could be a $100 billion market opportunity. And the vast majority of companies created in the space are still privately held. Only maybe venture capitalists, high net worth investors, angel investors might only traditionally have access to these privately held companies in kind of the proof of concept stage. So we're providing retail investors access to that to be able to, capture that upside.
My next guest is Alexander Somjen. He's the CEO of ORIG Therapeutics Holdings Inc, privately held, currently soon to be trading on the CSE. Alexander, welcome.
Hi, James. Thanks very much for having me. Glad to be here.
You bet. It's a pleasure to have you. Alex, we start with an overview. What is your business?
Sure. Yeah. So ORIG Therapeutics Holdings is an actively managed investment issuer. And we're providing investors with a diverse exposure to the psychedelics industry. The psychedelics space, according to some estimates, could be a $100 billion market opportunity. And the vast majority of companies created in the space are still privately held. And retail investors often don't have access to the kind of the most promising private deals in the space currently. And they don't have access to investment opportunities for these privately held companies that are still kind of in the proof of concept stage of the deal cycle. And that's kind of a gap we're planning to bridge with ORIG.
Oh, okay. Well, that's great. An investment issuer. So then is the value proposition to investors in ORIG that they will have early stage sort of pricing and access to some of these deals that they otherwise wouldn't have access to until they were much later on in their cycles?
Exactly. Yeah. So normally, the way you could think about it is, only maybe venture capitalists, high net worth investors, angel investors might only traditionally have access to these privately held companies in kind of the proof of concept stage. So we're providing retail investors access to that to be able to, capture that upside.
Sure. How much cash do you guys, or what's the net asset value of your portfolio at this point?
Yeah, so we actually just completed an oversubscribed private placement. We raised $6.5 million Canadian.
Okay.
And we've deployed about a third of that so far.
Okay. So you take minority stakes then?
Yeah, so typically how our model works, if we can't get a control position, let's say a 20% plus equity stake in the investee company, we at least want to make sure that we have ongoing involvement with the management team in the direction of the company by taking either an advisory role with the investee or a seat on the board.
Sure. How many shares are out in ORIG? And how many shares will there be, more importantly, once it's public?
Yeah, so we're looking at approximately 60 million shares out upon listing.
Okay. And so with a stock of stocks structure, so to speak, it's always really critical as to who the management team are, who's making the investment choices, who has the access. So who's the key people in your operational team?
Yeah, so myself, our CFO, Kelvin Lee, our Vice President of Investments, Alfred Wong, we all bring, collectively, 30 to 45 years experience in kind of investment management, capital markets. I've been involved in the cannabis sector for some time. And, we kind of view psychedelics as kind of the next big opportunity, kind of a cannabis 2.0. And then, of course, we have an investment committee that's comprised of three individuals. One is the chair of the investment committee, who also sits on our board, Mike Young, and also Jay Veer Singh, who is the CEO of a very successful pharmaceutical company. And Kyle Gould is the other investment committee member, who, again, a very seasoned investment professional, capital markets executive.
Mm-hmm. Wow, sounds like a winning team. What are some of the big wins associated with your management team in terms of performance or shareholder creation?
Yeah, so I mean, just in terms of the if you look at our existing management team, the investment committee, and then our founding partners, all of us have kind of been involved in creating more than $100 billion in market value over the years, with involvement in companies that were, founded by the people involved in Origin, and then in turn exited, companies such as MedRelief, Cybin, Adobe, Mint Pharmaceuticals, Green Thumb. So some kind of notable names for sure.
Yeah. All right. Then where do you see the size of the global total addressable market going in the psychedelic space?
I see it, there's certainly been some research reports published on the space. I do see it as $100 billion market opportunity. Mm-hmm. I think it'll kind of morph into that, over the next, let's say, 5 to 10 year period. And then of course that depends on how legislation evolves and the regulation of the industry evolves. But I think to the extent that we can see some of these companies show promise and show that it's in the best interest of society, especially in the treatment of mental health, to provide a regulatory framework for these early stage companies. I think that'll certainly help us reach that $100 billion market, total addressable market.
Right. A lot of people tend to try to compare the psychedelics business to the cannabis industry, and from my perspective, it's just not even anywhere near the same thing. Can you sort of outline the major differences between the cannabis industry versus the therapeutic psychedelics industry?
Yeah, so I think,
for example, there's not any immediate plans for a recreational psychedelic regime, is there?
No, exactly. And that was going to be my point is kind of, I do think the application for psychedelics, at least for the time being, is going to be medicinal, especially geared toward the treatment of mental health. Whereas cannabis, I mean, obviously there's a big medical market, there's now a big recreational market, and you're seeing a lot of cannabis companies kind of morph into CPG companies and controlled brands and things like that. I think with the psychedelic space, you're going to see companies that are kind of biotech, that are exploring the treatment potential, the pharmaceutical treatment potential in the context of mental health of various psychedelics. And then you're also going to see companies that have visibility to revenue generation, that are either have a telehealth platform providing patients access to psychedelic-based psychotherapy. You're going to see, wellness retreats, psychedelic-based wellness retreats, and then companies that are involved in kind of raising awareness, education, marketing, conferencing around the psychedelics industry. But I do think overall it's kind of a medicinal. It's a medicinal sphere for psychedelics, and I don't see that changing for the time being.
Sure. How soon do you think it is until, for example, I can pick up the phone and make an appointment for a psychedelic experience as just a member of the public, or will that always be the domain of referral from specialized mental health professionals?
Yeah, I think I think that could be next year's business. We are seeing companies that that we've invested in, and we're seeing other companies out there that are offering psychedelic-based wellness retreats. So that would be accessible to everybody. I do think that could be next year's business. Yeah.
Sure. How do you mitigate against the potential for a negative experience with psychedelics? I mean, I've got a sort of long, informal exposure to psychedelics, and certainly with some of the hallucinogenic ones, they can generate some pretty dramatic sort of scenes in your mind that in the past, as a youngster, I found them pretty intimidating, equivalent to the proverbial bad trip. So how does that get taken out of the equation in the whole rollout of the psychedelics experience?
I think as the industry matures and as more capital is deployed to it, and as the actual psychedelic substances can be refined, or let's say synthetically produced and standardized, and the dosing can be really measured and controlled, I think a professional, a medical professional, would be in a position to say, this is kind of the experience you can expect with this dose of psilocin or psilocybin, et cetera. So I think, over time, once the dosing can be really measured and controlled, I think that will mitigate a bad trip, so to speak.
Sure. All right, Alexander, that's a great introduction to the company. What does the timeline look like for going public?
So we're hoping to have our preliminary prospectus filed any day now, and we're hoping to be able to go public by Q4 of this year.
Okay, great. Well, just in time for investment season, as I like to call it. Alex, thank you very much for your time. We'll come back to you once you're public and have another conversation. Have a great day.
Thanks very much, James. Appreciate it.
Bye for now.